he wants to sign this plea deal so that he can be in jail and then get out in time for his kids to be his age. And Gotti Sr. says, no, if I was you, I wouldn't do that. I want to go into that courtroom one last time and stand up to everyone. And he says, and break their holes, which is a crazy way to describe it. And it's like, it was such a gross way for someone to talk about like being a man and standing up for himself, to be like, I'm going to go in there and break their holes. Because it's like, it's so disgusting. And they talk about how
so you're not gonna steal that line for when you have the talk with your son.
Now, Elliot,
I don't know. I'm not sure which talk that would be.
Now, Elliot, which holes are they talking about? I don't understand.
Now, let's take a moment and talk about that, because the human body only has so many holes. There's your nostrils, your ear holes, your mouth hole.
Your pizza pie hole.
Pizza pie hole. There's the holes in your eyes that let light in. There's your pores. Maybe he's talking about their pores, like covering them in gold paint like the woman in Goldfinger. And they asphyxiate because of the pores. And then there's the other holes. There's for the front hole for urination and the back hole for defecation. And now those holes, there's multiple uses for them. You can sometimes you're putting things in for pleasure. Sometimes you're taking babies out of them. But there's but it takes a lot to break them. Like, people put their holes through a lot of punishment for pleasure, and they rarely break, and they're often fixable.
Now, Elliot,
and so
is this what
so
the
what
movie,
is he gonna?
Is this what the movie Holes is about? What you're telling me right now?
Not having seen it, I'll have to assume that yes.
I mean,
the movie
based
Holes is about
on the
a young
expression
Shia
that Shia LaBeouf has on the box art, I think, it's about that.
I don't know if it's about a boy whose holes are broken and has to get them fixed, or a boy who's under threat of having his holes broken. But it's like, at a certain point you have to wonder what's going to say break about an organic part of the body that's not a bone is weird. Like, those holes are soft tissue. So to say break is like, if it's gross to say tear their holes, but that's more accurate. And there's often some tearing, say, during natural childbirth. During vaginal childbirth, and that's a natural thing that happens because babies are huge and they're coming out of a very small space. Now, to say break implies that there's a hard structure to it, that there might be cracks or some kind of fracturing where maybe pieces flake off or fall off, like it pebbleizes a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know what is he talking about? First, that he's going to freeze them with liquid nitrogen and then smash them with a sledgehammer? Because
specifically in their whole area.
Just the whole area. So he needs to use one of those little doctor hammers that you use to test your reflexes so he doesn't break the whole body. Or maybe it's a localized use of the nitrogen to just freeze that part. But it's a very good question. What holes is he talking about, and how is he going to break them? And it's the subject of today's episode of the flop holes.
Guessing it's the ear holes.
Now, here on the flop holes, we talk about holes and things that people do with them. And today we're talking about break-in holes. That's right. Break into electric hole-a-loo. And my guests today are Dan McCoy, hole specialist. Dan McCoy is and Stuart Wellington, who often shops at Whole Foods, your place for food that goes into your holes. Now, guys, when I say break your holes, what does that conjure up in your minds? I just want to get your first impressions.
Why did Dan look at me?
Well, I mean, I feel like we've already kind of covered what I get in my head. I get like a guy with a big sledgehammer kind of just like cracking it into someone's butt.
Okay. And now the butt already has a crack in it. Yeah. This is creating new cracks or different cracks? How does this work exactly?
You just
and be very extreme in your detailing.
It's more about shattering the pelvis, I think.
Okay, now you're talking about that. Okay, so Stuart, now your experience with holes is a little different. Whole Foods is a chain of grocery stores owned by the Amazon company, which also distributed Gotti, the film we were talking about earlier. Now, if he was saying break Whole Foods, would that mean like what, to literally demolish a storefront, or is he talking about driving the company into bankruptcy, which would be hard to do since Amazon has such deep pockets? What do you think, Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough one. I think putting a second crack on a butt is kind of like a madman's gambit. I think people haven't considered horizontal as a possibility.
So more of a whole reorientation
than a breaking. I'm going to get out
some
graph paper here in a minute, and I think, I mean, I don't know about the angles. There could be an issue. Maybe if I fold the graph paper, it might work that way. We'll find out.
Great. Now while we give Stuart some time, let's go to our next segment, the Flop Hole Recommends, where we recommend movies or books related to holes. Now, of course, I'm going to recommend Disney's The Black Hole, the story of a spaceship that literally goes into a person's butt and finds a portal to hell.
Wait, is that what happens in that movie?
There's also a lovable robot and also kind of a mean robot, and I guess they all fit into somebody's butt. Now, my runner-up recommendation is, of course, the movie Holes, starring Shia LaBeouf, which I haven't seen, but I have to assume is about a boy who's either has a broken hole that he needs to fix or is in danger of having his hole broken. Do you guys have any recommendations for the recommendation segment of the Flop Hole?
I'll recommend Ace in the Hole, starring Kirk Douglas. Originally called The Big Carnival. It's it's
which
a very
would be
cynical,
inappropriate for this segment if it was named that.
cynical examination of how the media can drum up a story.
Now, it's about someone who gets trapped in a collapsed mine, which is literally a broken hole in the earth, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm going to recommend The Whole 9 Yards, which I think is better than its sequel, The Whole 10 Yards, which, though still appropriate for this segment, didn't come to mind first.
And now it's time to turn to our sponsor. We're sponsored tonight by Holebuster, which is it's both a video store that only has movies about holes and also a place to go to get your hole busted. Which hole do you want? How much do you want it busted? That's up to you. Holebuster.
Oh, now, wow. It's what, a scale of 1 to 10? What's going on there? Or do they have different like face images to represent the amount of busted?
No, I can't say I've never been there, but I'll just say Holebuster. Go there. You get 10% off with the code FLOP. Holebuster. Bustin' makes you feel good. Now, turning back to Gotti, John Jr., he signs the plea agreement.